If you're an old school gamer such as myself, you've probably grown up with all of the previous Zelda games, like A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo or the original Link's Awakening on Game Boy. But for the younger audience out there, the Link's Awakening remake that they had on the Nintendo Switch ended up having a lot of the old confusing game design of the original Game Boy game repackaged with new visuals and gameplay. Zelda Echoes of Wisdom takes the style of Link's Awakening's remake, but injects modern gameplay mechanics that you would expect to see in Breath of the Wild. The map itself has a striking similarity to A Link to the Past, but there's something about playing the older Zelda games that makes me really appreciate Echoes of Wisdom. It's a strange thing to conceptualize and explain, but basically when I was playing this game, I kept surprising myself like, oh right, I can climb over the trees. It's disguised as an old school Zelda game, but it has a lot of the modern mechanics that you've come to expect with Nintendo and their magic of innovation. However, all of this beautiful visuals does come at a cost, and there are some very select areas where the frame rate will chug in this game. I'm suspect that the next Nintendo console is going to be backwards compatible, which would make a lot more sense for the instability of a lot of their more recent releases. Now, speaking of the combat and the gameplay, well, this is basically Zelda Necromancer Edition. If you've ever wanted to play a summoner in a Zelda game, this is it. Every enemy that you kill, you can absorb and then you can summon. A lot of enemies have their own strengths and weaknesses, and they all act different from one another. But your summons aren't restricted to creatures. You can also summon random items in the environment, like beds or pots. You can use a trampoline to jump to higher locations, and as you progress through the game, completing more dungeons and what have you, you'll unlock the ability to summon more things at a given time. And as you get further and further in the game, you'll start to come across stronger creatures that cost a lot more to summon, so it's really invaluable that you get those upgrades. Now, Zelda herself isn't entirely useless. You do have access to a sword transformation. This basically just turns you into Link, where you'll have access to your sword and shield and get some various other weapons as you progress further. Because yeah, that's right, this is the first good Zelda game where you play as Zelda. The story was also fairly serviceable. It wasn't very somber or dark, but it did have some meaningful characters. Like the main quests and even the side quests have that signature Nintendo style of writing where the conversations that you have with these characters feels meaningful. It's very odd to have a game look this childish, but manage to have a script that's so human. The entire game took me a little over 20 hours to complete. Granted, I did do the majority of the side content, and once you beat the game, it'll basically tell you all of the items that you're missing to get 100% completion. It's by no means required, but I'm definitely gonna go out of my way to get all of that stuff. I will say the very limited criticisms that I would share with this game is the UI is severely lacking. You just have so many items at your disposal, and the game does a terrible job sorting them. There's not even a favorites function. It's still better than Tears of the Kingdom's UI, but Nintendo needs to step it up soon. I would also say that because this game doesn't hold your hand, there are some puzzles that absolutely bewildered me, because the solution to these puzzles would usually require a mechanic that the game never taught me, which I think is the better of two evils. I'm fine with struggling on a couple puzzles if it means that I can figure them out myself. Overall, I can easily recommend this game. It was a surprisingly unique experience with how relaxing this game was, but it was also really exciting just because you never knew what power-up you would get next. The surface might make this game seem childish, but the breathtaking amount of depth has this as a Game of the Year contender for me.